A child I had never seen before tugged on my shirt in the grocery store and told me to leave. When I asked where her mother was, she looked at me with terrified eyes and whispered one word, "Hurry." Then the lights went out, and I understood exactly what she meant. It was a Wednesday evening, and I was standing in the cereal aisle comparing prices on my phone like I did every week. The store was quiet, almost empty, which was exactly how I liked it. I was so focused on finding a coupon that I didn't notice the little girl until I felt her small fingers pulling at the bottom of my shirt. I looked down and saw a child I had never seen before. She was maybe 6 or 7 years old, with tangled blonde hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed in days. She wore a faded pink dress that was too big for her, and her feet were bare and dirty against the cold tile floor. But it was her eyes that made me freeze. They were wide and glassy, filled with a kind of fear that no child should ever know. "My mom says don't buy anything today," she whispered. "Just leave." I crouched down to her level, confused and concerned. I looked around the aisle for an adult, for anyone who might be with this girl. There was no one. "Where's your mom, sweetie? Are you lost?" She shook her head so hard her tangled hair whipped across her face. "She's not here. She sent me to warn people. You have to go. Now." "Warn people about what?" The girl's eyes darted toward the front of the store, then back to me. Her grip on my shirt tightened. "Hurry, please. They're already here." Before I could ask another question, the overhead lights flickered. Once, twice. Then everything went completely dark. The emergency lights kicked on a moment later, casting the entire store in a dim red glow that made everything look wrong. I heard a woman scream somewhere near the checkout lanes. Then I heard a sound that made my blood turn cold, the heavy metallic click of the front doors locking. The little girl grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the back of the aisle. "They're already here," she said again. "We have to hide." To understand how I ended up hiding in a dark grocery store with a stranger's child, you need to know what my life looked like before that night. Subscribe for more stories, and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Marin. I'm 26 years old, and I live alone in a small apartment in a mid-sized town in North Carolina. I work as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation clinic about 15 minutes from my place. I moved here 3 years ago after finishing my degree, drawn by a job offer and the promise of a quieter life than the city where I grew up. My parents, Donna and Ray, still live in Charlotte and come to visit every few months. My older sister Tamsin lives in Seattle with her husband, and she sends me pictures of their new baby almost every day. I'm close with my family, but I like my independence. I like my quiet routines. Wednesday evenings are my grocery nights. I finish work at 5, go home to change out of my scrubs, and head to the Westbrook Market around 6:30. It's a habit I've had for 2 years. The store is never crowded on Wednesdays, which is exactly why I chose that day. I can take my time, compare prices, and avoid the chaos of weekend shopping. I know some of the employees by name. The cashier, a teenage girl named Bethany, always asks about my weekend plans. The store manager, a heavyset man named Garrett, once helped me carry my bags to the car when it was pouring rain. It's the kind of place where people know your face even if they don't know your name. On this particular Wednesday, I pulled into the Westbrook Market parking lot around 6:45. The lot was emptier than usual. I counted maybe 5 or 6 cars scattered across the spaces near the entrance. I didn't think much of it. Sometimes the store was just quieter than other nights. I grabbed my reusable bags from the back seat, pulled out my shopping list, and headed inside. Something felt different the moment I walked through the doors. The usual background music wasn't playing. The aisles seemed dimmer than normal, like some of the overhead lights were turned off or burned out. The store had a strange stillness to it, like the air itself was holding its breath. I saw only a few other shoppers. An elderly man examining canned vegetables near the soup section, a young woman with a toddler in her cart by the bread, and a middle-aged couple arguing quietly near the dairy coolers. The checkout lanes were mostly dark and empty except for Bethany, who stood at her register looking at her phone. I told myself I was imagining things. The store was just having a slow night. It happened sometimes. There was nothing to worry about. I pushed my cart toward the cereal aisle and started my usual routine. I pulled up the store's app on my phone and searched for coupons while I compared prices on the shelf. I was so absorbed in the task that the rest of the world faded away. I didn't notice the strange quiet. I didn't notice the nervous energy in the air. I didn't notice the little girl approaching until I felt her hand tug at the bottom of my shirt. She appeared out of nowhere, this small, dirty child with frightened eyes and bare feet. She didn't look like she belonged in this store. She didn't look like she belonged anywhere safe. She looked like a child who had been through something terrible and was trying to warn me before it happened to me too. I had no idea that in the next few minutes, my quiet Wednesday routine would turn into a fight for survival. I had no idea that this little girl would become the reason I made it out alive. The little girl's grip on my hand was surprisingly strong for someone so small. She pulled me toward the back of the cereal aisle, away from the dim red glow of the emergency lights near the front of the store. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "What's happening?" I whispered. "Who's here?" She didn't answer. She just kept pulling me deeper into the store, past the shelves of breakfast foods, and into the next aisle. We crouched down behind a display of paper towels stacked on a promotional table. The girl pressed her finger to her lips, her eyes wide and pleading. I heard voices near the front of the store, men's voices, low and commanding. Then I heard Garrett, the store manager, his tone higher than usual, shaky with fear. "Please, just take whatever you want. The safe is in the back office. I'll open it for you. Shut up and get everyone to the front. Now." I peered through a gap between the paper towel packages and saw movement near the checkout lanes. 3 men in dark clothing and ski masks were moving through the store with purpose. One of them carried a shotgun, the barrel glinting under the emergency lights. Another had a handgun and was waving it toward the handful of customers, herding them like animals toward the front. The third man walked slowly down the main aisle, his head turning left and right as he scanned for anyone hiding. This wasn't random. These men had planned this. They had waited until the store was nearly empty, cut the power, locked the doors. They knew exactly what they were doing. I ducked back down, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The little girl watched me with those 2 big eyes, waiting for me to do something, to say something. I realized I didn't even know her name. "What's your name?" I whispered. "Penny." "Okay, Penny. Can you tell me what's going on? How did you know this was going to happen?" Penny's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She took a shaky breath and started explaining in a voice so quiet I had to lean close to hear her. Her mother's name was Darla. She worked in the stockroom at this store, unloading deliveries and organizing inventory. Earlier that evening, Darla had been taking a break near the loading dock when she heard voices in the parking lot. 3 men were standing by a van, talking about what they were going to do. One of them mentioned Garrett by name. He said Garrett was going to pay for what he did. Darla recognized the voice. It belonged to a man named Clint, who used to work at the store. He had been fired 6 months ago for stealing cash from the registers. When they let him go, he threatened to come back and make everyone sorry. Darla didn't have time to call the police. The men were already walking toward the store. She told Penny to go inside, to find as many people as she could, and warn them to leave before it was too late. She told Penny to be brave. "Where is your mom now?" I asked, dreading the answer. Penny's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. They found her. They took her to the front with the others. My chest tightened. This woman, Darla, had sent her own daughter into danger to warn strangers. She had put everyone else's safety before her own, and now she was being held at gunpoint with the rest of the hostages. I heard footsteps coming closer. The third man, the one scanning the aisles, was moving in our direction. I grabbed Penny and pulled her further behind the display, pressing us both against the cold metal shelving. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped. I could see the man's shadow stretching across the floor just a few feet away. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, then moved on to the next aisle. I let out a silent breath. "We can't stay here," I whispered to Penny. "Eventually they're going to search every aisle. We need to find a way out." "There's a door in the back," Penny said. "In the stockroom where my mom works. It goes outside to where the trucks come, the loading dock. If we could get to the stockroom without being seen, we could slip out the back and call for help. It was risky. The stockroom was on the other side of the store, past the pharmacy and the frozen food section. We would have to move through open spaces, exposed and vulnerable. But staying hidden wasn't going to save anyone. Not Penny, not her mother, not the other hostages being held at the front of the store. I looked at Penny, this brave little girl who had walked through a dark store to warn strangers because her mother asked her to. If she could be that courageous, so could I. Okay, I said, here's what we're going to do. I knew the smart thing to do was stay hidden. Wait for someone outside to notice something was wrong. Wait for the police to arrive. But I could hear crying from the front of the store. I could hear Garrett pleading with the men, his voice cracking with fear. And I kept thinking about Darla, Penny's mother, who had risked everything to warn people she didn't even know. I couldn't just hide and do nothing. Penny, I need you to listen to me very carefully, I whispered. I'm going to try to get to the stockroom and find a way out. Once I'm outside, I can call the police, but I need you to stay here and hide until I come back for you. Her small hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Don't leave me, she begged. Her voice was barely audible, but the fear in it was overwhelming. Please don't leave me alone. I looked into her eyes and saw a child who had already been through too much tonight. She had walked through this dark store by herself to warn strangers. She had watched her mother get taken by armed men. She had every reason to be terrified, but I also knew that taking her with me would put her in more danger. If I got caught, at least she would still be hidden. At least she would have a chance. I know you're scared, I said softly. I'm scared too, but your mom was brave enough to send you in here to help people. Now I need to be brave enough to get help for her. Can you be brave for just a little longer? Penny's chin trembled. Tears spilled down her dirty cheeks. But she nodded. Hide behind these boxes, I told her. Don't make a sound. Don't come out for anyone except me or the police. I promise I'll come back for you. She let go of my wrist slowly, like it was the hardest thing she had ever done. I squeezed her hand once, then turned and started moving. I stayed low, using the shelves for cover. The emergency lights cast long shadows that helped conceal my movement, but they also made everything look distorted and unfamiliar. A store I had shopped in 100 times suddenly felt like a maze I had never seen before. I moved past the canned goods aisle, then the cleaning supplies. I could hear the men shouting orders at the hostages near the front. One of them was demanding that Garrett move faster, that he stop stalling. I heard a woman crying and a child whimpering, the young mother with the toddler. My stomach turned. I reached the pharmacy section and pressed myself against the counter, scanning the path ahead. The frozen food aisle was next, then the stockroom door. Maybe 50 feet of open space. If one of the men decided to patrol this section, I would be completely exposed. I waited until I heard all three voices concentrated near the front of the store. Then I moved. I crossed the frozen food aisle as quickly and quietly as I could, my bare feet cold against the tile. I had kicked off my shoes somewhere near the paper towel display because they made too much noise. I didn't even remember doing it. My body was operating on pure instinct now, making decisions my conscious mind couldn't process. I reached the stockroom door and pushed it open. The room was pitch black except for a single emergency light near the ceiling, casting a weak red glow over stacked boxes and pallets of merchandise. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped it. The screen lit up and I winced at the brightness, quickly dimming it before dialing 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? There are armed men inside the Westbrook Market on Ridgewood Drive, I whispered as fast as I could. 3 of them. They have hostages. They locked the doors and cut the lights. Please send help. Ma'am, stay on the line. Officers are being dispatched to your location. Can you tell me where you are inside the store? I'm in the stockroom. I'm trying to get out through the back exit. Stay on the line if you can. Help is on the way. I found the emergency exit at the back of the stockroom, a heavy metal door with a push bar across the middle. A sign above it read, "Emergency exit only. Alarm will sound." I hesitated for just a moment. The second I opened this door, Everyone in the store would know where I was. The men would come running, but the police were already on their way. I just had to get outside and stay alive until they arrived. I pushed the bar, and the door flew open. An alarm started blaring, piercing and deafening, echoing through the entire building. I ran. The alarm screamed through the building as I burst out onto the loading dock. The night air hit my face, cold and sharp, and for a split second, I felt relief. Then I heard the stockroom door slam open behind me. I didn't look back. I jumped off the edge of the loading dock and hit the pavement hard, my bare feet stinging against the rough asphalt. I ran toward the parking lot, toward the street, toward anywhere that wasn't inside that store. "Stop!" a man's voice shouted behind me. "Get back here!" I could hear his footsteps pounding on the concrete, getting closer. I pushed harder, my lungs burning, my legs screaming at me to stop. I ran past dumpsters and stacked pallets, past a delivery truck parked at the edge of the lot. The street was just ahead. I could see the lights of the gas station across the road. Then I heard the sirens. 3 police cruisers came tearing around the corner, their lights flashing red and blue against the dark buildings. They swerved into the parking lot from different directions, their headlights sweeping across the pavement like searchlights. I kept running toward them, waving my arms over my head. "Help!" I screamed. "They have hostages inside." The man chasing me stopped. I heard his footsteps falter, then turn. When I finally looked back, he was sprinting toward the store, disappearing through the loading dock door. He had made a choice. He was going back to his partners instead of getting caught alone. An officer was out of his car before it fully stopped. He ran toward me with his weapon drawn, shouting for me to get down. I dropped to my knees on the cold pavement, my hands raised, tears streaming down my face. "I'm not one of them," I gasped. I was inside. There are 3 men with guns. They have people at the front of the store. The officer helped me to my feet and passed me to a female officer who led me toward an ambulance that had arrived behind the cruisers. She wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and asked if I was hurt. I couldn't answer. My whole body was shaking. From the back of the ambulance, I watched the standoff unfold. More police cars arrived. Officers surrounded the building, taking positions behind their vehicles with weapons aimed at the doors. A negotiator was called in and began speaking through a megaphone, urging the men inside to release the hostages and surrender peacefully. The next 45 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat in that ambulance, wrapped in a scratchy blanket, watching the red and blue lights flash against the store's windows. I couldn't stop thinking about Penny, still hiding behind those paper towels, alone in the dark. I couldn't stop thinking about Darla, held at gunpoint because she tried to do the right thing. Then I saw movement near the loading dock. An officer was walking toward the ambulance, and he was carrying someone small in his arms. Penny. She was shivering and crying, but she was alive. She had followed my path through the stockroom and slipped out the emergency exit while the men were distracted by the police outside. An officer had found her crouched behind a dumpster, her dirty feet tucked under her faded pink dress, waiting for someone to rescue her. They brought her to the ambulance and sat her beside me. I pulled her into my arms without thinking, and she buried her face against my shoulder. She didn't say anything. She just held on like I was the only solid thing in a world that had fallen apart. A few minutes later, the standoff ended. With police surrounding the building and no way out, the men made a decision. They released the hostages and walked out the front doors with their hands raised. I watched them get forced to the ground, handcuffed, and loaded into separate patrol cars. The hostages emerged one by one, shaken but alive. Garrett came out first, his face pale and his hands still trembling. Bethany followed, crying into her phone as she called someone. The elderly man, the young mother clutching her toddler, and then Darla. She came running out of that store before the officers could stop her, her eyes scanning the crowd desperately. When she saw Penny in my arms, she let out a sound that was half sob and half scream. She sprinted toward us, and Penny launched herself into her mother's arms. I watched them hold each other, crying and rocking back and forth. Darla looked at me over Penny's shoulder, her face streaked with tears, and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." I couldn't speak. I just nodded. tears spilling down my own cheeks, and watched a mother hold her daughter like she would never let go. The police identified the three men within hours. The leader was Clint Barrow, the former employee Darla had recognized in the parking lot. He had been fired 6 months earlier for stealing from the registers, and he had spent every day since then planning his revenge. The other two were his cousins, both with criminal records in other states for armed robbery. They had driven in from Georgia specifically to help Clint with this job. The investigation revealed just how carefully they had planned everything. They had watched the store for weeks, learning the schedules, noting when the cash pickups happened, figuring out exactly when the store would be emptiest. Wednesday nights were perfect because Garrett always counted the weekly deposits in the back office around 7. They had cut the power from an electrical panel on the outside of the building. They had jammed the automatic doors so no one could escape. They thought they had covered every detail. They didn't count on Darla overhearing their conversation. They didn't count on a 6-year-old girl being brave enough to warn strangers. And they didn't count on me. All three men were charged with armed robbery, kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment. Clint received additional charges for making terroristic threats and for being the mastermind behind the operation. None of them were granted bail. The trial happened 4 months later, and the jury didn't need long to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Clint was sentenced to 15 years in prison. His cousins each received 10. Garrett closed the store for 2 weeks after the incident. When it reopened, he installed new security cameras, panic buttons at every register, and hired an armed guard to work the evening shifts. He told me once that he still had nightmares about that night. I told him I understood because I had them too. My parents drove up from Charlotte the morning after it happened. My mom held me for a long time without saying anything. My dad kept asking if I needed anything, if there was something he could fix. There wasn't, but I appreciated him trying. My sister Tamsin called from Seattle and cried on the phone for 20 minutes. She made me promise to move closer to family, but we both knew I wouldn't. This was my home now. I wasn't going to let one terrible night take that away from me. The weeks that followed were hard. I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red glow of the emergency lights and heard the metallic click of the doors locking. I jumped at loud noises. I avoided the Westbrook Market completely, driving an extra 15 minutes to shop at a different store. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma, and slowly, week by week, I began to feel like myself again. I stayed in touch with Darla and Penny. We met for lunch a few weeks after the incident, at a little diner halfway between my apartment and their house. Penny was quieter than I expected, but she smiled when she saw me. Darla told me she had quit her job at the Westbrook Market and found work at a bakery closer to home. She said Penny still had nightmares sometimes, but they were getting less frequent. She talks about you, Darla said. She calls you the lady who kept her promise. I didn't know what to say to that. I just reached across the table and squeezed Penny's hand. She squeezed back. That night changed me in ways I'm still figuring out. I used to think courage was something other people had. Soldiers and firefighters and people who did extraordinary things. I never thought of myself as brave. I was just a physical therapist who liked her quiet routines. But that night, I learned that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. It's about making a choice when everything inside you is screaming to stay hidden. I think about Penny often, a 6-year-old girl who walked through a dark store to warn strangers because her mother asked her to. She trusted me to keep my promise, even though she was scared to be left alone. And I think about Darla, who sent her own daughter into danger because she knew it might save lives. Those two taught me more about bravery than anyone I've ever met. A stranger's child saved my life that night by trusting me with a warning. And I saved hers by trusting my instincts when everything told me to stay hidden. Sometimes that's all courage is. Two strangers choosing to believe in each other when it matters most. If you want more stories, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from.